Hello and welcome to my channel today. Recently I bought a quarter of a beef from a local butcher, and when I was trying to figure out what a quarter beef amounted to and how much I was actually going to be paying per pound for what I put in my freezer, I decided that I would do a video on what I ended up getting, just to give people a visual and some information on how to buy locally raised beef in large quantities. In this video, I'll be covering the pros and cons of buying bulk meat, as well as a brief description on the difference between grass-fed, grain-fed, and grass-fed grain-finished. A quick description of what hanging weight means in terms of pricing, impacts on pricing, and then we're going to look at all my meat. So let's get started. All right, so the pros of buying meat in bulk from a butcher. First of all, if you're doing it right, you're getting something grown locally. You'll notice when I opened, I said local butcher. I have butchers to the north of me and to the south of me in the larger cities, and they do not get their beef as local as I would like. When I went in to ask, they cited several states away. And so I decided to drive 2 hours to a butcher who said that they get their meat locally and order from there. So it is worth it to look around and find the butcher who's going to get you what you want from where you want. So the benefits, the pros, it's going to be local meat, which means it's going to be fresher meat. For instance, I went in and ordered my meat and they said it would be ready in 2 weeks. And that's because they had to source the beef from a local farmer, hang it, and let it get ready to be processed and then process it. So at the most, when they called me, my beef was going to be 2 weeks from alive. That's not a way to put it. So the beef I picked up had only been in a fridge or freezer for up to about 2 weeks, which makes it super fresh. In addition to it being super fresh, you also get to choose the cuts of meat you want. And you can even choose cuts of meat that they don't typically carry at the butcher shop or in your local grocery stores. There's also less potential for contamination. If you follow food safety recalls like I do, you know that a lot of stuff gets recalled these days, and meat is no exception. The more animals that are packed into a feedlot, the more animals that are being processed into the same thing means more opportunity for contamination, especially like things with ground beef. So the ground beef that is going to be in my freezer came from one cow. So that means a lot less risk when it comes to food safety. Like I said, you want to make sure that your butcher is getting things that are truly local. And you'll also want to ask your butcher if there's anything else you can get. I asked about pork, which was a yes. And then I asked about other stuff, and he cited bison and lamb, even goat, which I'm super excited about because I was raised on a farm and we raised goats both for milk production and for eating. And it's very hard to find goat, and it's a very interesting meat to work with. And I've only done it, I think, once as an adult. So I'm looking forward to ordering my goat in the spring. And then there's possibly duck. But your butcher might actually have even more selection of stuff that you can get. So it's always worth to ask. Now, like I said, in the spring, I'm going to get a goat, and that's because there are seasons for butchering. For beef, that's about right now, and if you wanted beef now, you probably should have tried to order a little sooner, as there are only so many beef that butchers will get in or that local farmers will have available, and you want to make sure to get on that list. That goes the same for pork or any other custom processed meat. Now, all those pros, and obviously there are cons, and these cons are mostly related to storage and finance. And that makes buying meat this way a sort of privileged thing to be able to do. For one, $700 is a lot to throw down for meat at once. It will require, more than likely, saving. So you'll want to save up for the meat. And then once you get it, the other problem is where are you going to store it? A quarter of a cow takes up quite a bit of space. My deep freeze in the basement, I bought one specifically to store beef, at this quantity because I would have not been able to fit it in my little freezer. And I'm sure that most people will find it difficult to have the space for a deep freeze because it does take up space, and a lot of people live in small spaces. And so again, that's what makes buying meat this way a privilege that people should recognize. So if you're not buying your meat from a butcher who's sourcing from local farms, you're more than likely getting it from a grocery store or a price club, and that meat comes from feedlots or CAFOs, which means concentrating animal feeding operations, which means it's unlikely that your meat spent much time in a pasture eating grass. Most of them go through what is called slaughter channels, where they get moved from a farm to another facility into smaller and smaller concentrated areas until they're crammed together on a feedlot where they can barely move. Which is a problem because of sanitation, but also a little from a nutritional perspective, because they're not going to be grass-fed. There are 3 ways generally that beef is fed, and that's grass-fed, grain-fed, and grass-fed grain-finished. Grass-fed is pretty self-explanatory, but it does not always mean that they're in a pasture. It simply means that they're fed grasses, and that can be wheat or oats. Now, grain-fed means that they're eating corn and soy and other additives that are put into the feed that is made for them. Now, grass-fed grain-finished can mean a number of different things. Primarily, it means that they've had mostly a grass diet, but they've been supplemented with grain. And that will actually benefit them in the way that it helps them put on weight, which translates to more marbling in your meat, as well as a little bit better flavor. So grass-fed beef generally has less fat in it compared to grain-fed or grass-fed grain-finished beef. In addition to being a little bit more lean, grass-fed beef has less amount of saturated fat, fewer calories, and higher amounts of nutrients like vitamin A and vitamin E, as well as a different composition of fatty acids. Grass-fed beef will also be a little bit darker in color because of the different food that it eats. Now we're getting down to what I paid for and the things that could have impacted the price I paid. First one is weather. Now this is a big one because weather impacts both the livelihood of the animal stock as well as the livelihood of what the animals are eating. And by that I mean, if it's too hot or it's too cold, the animal can die, which has happened quite often more recently in across the Midwest in some states, animals freezing to death or animals dying because of heat exhaustion. In addition to that, the crops can be impacted by too much rain, too much drought, insects and pests, and if the cost of feed goes up, the cost of your beef goes up. There's also animal diseases such as anthrax, mad cow disease, and bovine spongiform, which can decimate populations of cows and also increase prices, supply and demand. In addition to weather and diseases, there's pests and insects. Currently in the United States, there is a new invasive pest called the longhorn tick that is impacting cattle. Specifically, I read in Ohio right now, but it's a very, very invasive tick that is not like other ticks. And if it gets in the population of cows and kills them and makes them sick, prices of beef go up. There's the cost of farm equipment. There's the cost of farm machinery, and the cost of farm machinery includes the upkeep of the farm machinery and the gas that goes into the vehicles, so that also impacts the price of the beef at the end of the day. And then there's the transportation, which also is going to impact the cost of beef. So with the transportation comes the maintenance of the vehicles being used for transportation, the cost of the gas going into the vehicles for transportation, the cost of the vehicle itself. So as you can see, there are a number of factors that will impact the price of beef, both from a butcher, but especially from a grocer. So when you're buying large portions of beef from a butcher, they're most commonly selling it by something called hanging weight, which can also be called carcass weight or dressed weight. And Wikipedia defines this as weight of an animal after being partially butchered, removing all the internal organs and often the head, as well as inedible portions of the tail and legs. It includes the bones, cartilage, and other body structures still attached after this initial butchering. So what that means, you're paying for bone, you're paying for excess fat, you're paying for sinew, you're paying for everything basically that's not the head, the tail, or the lower portions of the legs. And that can be quite a bit. So to determine my freezer cost for what I bought, I used a calculation provided by a video by the Bearded Butchers. It's quite a long video, but I highly recommend it, especially if you're considering buying beef in big chunks. The video I'm describing, they took a whole half of a beef and they cut it down and they showed you where different cuts come from and the different options you have for cuts. And then they weighed it all and weighed the excess and came up with a calculation of what percentage of that half a beef was actually usable. And that percentage, I believe, was like 63.5 or 64.5%. So that means everything over 63 or 64% was stuff that could not be used for human consumption. One of the things that you also want to consider, the hanging weight also includes evaporation. So once an animal is slaughtered and hung in a cooler, it's usually hung there for a little while. And in that time, the moisture in the meat evaporates, and so some of the weight gets lost to evaporation. I paid $3.99 a pound hanging weight for my beef based on 64.5% yield. That means I paid about $6.20 a pound, which I consider very reasonable. But to give you an idea of pricing, now this might get a little weedy, but the other way that animals are sold for slaughter is by live weight, and that's when you would go to a cattle auction and get yourself a whole animal, but then what are you going to do with it? You're just going to have to like feed it and slaughter it, cut it up yourself, and nobody's doing that except for professionals. But the live weight cost of beef as of this video, according to my data that I found online, is $1.79 to $1.80 a pound live weight. And live weight, of course, that includes the head and the tail and the lower legs and all that stuff. So I don't know if that's a good deal or a bad deal, but you and I are not going to buy a whole live cow. So I don't think we need to worry about that. But that's a good thing to know because that's the base price before it goes through all the processes and then gets in the cooler at the grocery store. Now, according to data from the USDA, the average price of beef in the United States right now is $8 a pound. These are important things to know if you're trying to determine if you're getting a good deal or not. My price at $3.99 a pound hanging weight is a price in Minnesota. I checked out the prices of a number of different places across the United States, and this is what I found. Now, some places will include a processing fee on top of the regular price, and I will definitely mention that in this graph. So in New Jersey, the price I found was $5.50 a pound hanging weight plus processing fee. And some of the sites I saw the processing fee as much as about 70 cents per pound on top of the $5.50 a pound. In Ohio, the price that I came across was $3.75 plus processing. And on the farm site that I got this from, they estimated that the cost of the meat that you're going to put in the freezer will come out to be about $6.66 a pound. A quarter of beef in Iowa goes for $870.50. If you find out any other prices, put in the description below, especially if you find that I am completely wrong on the sites that I found this information. In New York State, a quarter of a beef goes for $6.85 a pound, but if you were to buy the whole beef, they'll sell it to you for $5.51 a pound. And yes, the more you buy, the cheaper it is, but there are, other storage considerations and the actual cost up front that you're going to have to worry about. So I don't think that most people buy a whole beef unless they're like a restaurant. The highest price I found was in Florida. And it was $12.50 a pound hanging weight, which is unrealistically expensive in my opinion. And I guess I don't know the grocery store prices there, but at this price, I definitely would not have bought a quarter of a beef. If you're interested in this kind of information, I put a link in the description below for the National Monthly Grass-Fed Beef Report. And that breaks down a bunch of prices when it comes to grass-fed beef. That might be interesting to you. I did look at the price of beef in Canada. I think Alberta was the place that I'm citing here. And I don't necessarily know what the exchange rate is right now, but what I found was $7 a pound hanging weight price for bulk beef. So what does $700 of meat look like? Let's unpack these boxes and let's see what I actually got. But according to my receipt, I got 170 pounds of beef for my freezer. I'm a little concerned because I did ask for bones, and I'm hoping that they didn't put that in these boxes before weighing or weigh the bones as part of that, because I didn't want to pay for bones. But I wanted bones because I want to do some experimentation with stocks, but also bone marrow. I'm not going to explain what that means. All right, so I'm going to take you over here and we're going to look at some meat. This puppy here is full of 1 pound things of ground beef. So I'm going to go ahead and take them out and count them. I'll be right back. 38 pounds of ground beef in 1 pound packages. But seriously, look at this. Okay, I'm not impressed by this. 1/4 pound beef tenderloin. This one is 0.41 pounds. A little bit more reasonable. What the fuck is this? Anyway, so in that box, there were 4 beef tenderloins. There were 6 New York strip steaks. Ooh, so cold. All right. 5 arm roasts, 4 top sirloin steaks, 2 chuck roasts, and a sirloin top roast. Let's get this other box out. More ground beef. 27 pounds more of ground beef. Ah. So 65 pounds of this is ground beef. The bones I asked for, nice. It looks like 9 rib steaks. Ooh, and the beef heart I asked for. Yes, beef heart. I've got a thing about hearts. So that is what $679, a quarter of a beef, can look like. Because like I said, you can pick the cuts you want. And for beef on mine, the choices were, and honestly, if I had a special request, they'd probably be able to do it because these are just the most common cuts of beef. If you watch the Bearded Butcher video that I've linked in the description below, they cover a whole bunch of cuts of beef that even I've never really heard of and that are like growing in popularity. And the reason I have so much ground beef is because that's what I asked for. I find it to just be I use more ground beef than any other kind of beef product. So here you can see the different choices and selections I could have got. Those were the most common cuts that my butcher had. Yours might actually have different ones. Now I'm gonna go and weigh this, which means I'm gonna have to calculate all of these pieces. And then I'm gonna come back and let you know if I actually got what I paid for. I'll be right back. All right, I did some maths and I'm not good at maths, but I think my yield is 63%, which is not far off. And that doesn't include the bones or the heart. I don't think that they necessarily charged me for those. In any case, I paid for 170 pounds hanging weight, and the yield was 107 pounds. And what that gave me was 66, because I recounted wrong the first time, 66 pounds of ground beef, 8 roasts, and then 23 various steaks, which is 97 pieces. I'm trying to break down like per meal what that comes out to be. I don't think I'm gonna be able to do that. I still think I got a great deal. I haven't tasted any of the meat yet. I imagine it'll be good. I have purchased meat from this butcher in individual pieces, and it was good. So, anyway, I hope this was interesting or helpful. If you want to share your local meat prices, I'd love to find out what your local butchers are charging you, especially considering, like I said, I paid $3.99 a pound hang weight, and that Florida cost was over $12 a pound hang weight. I want to know if that's realistic or not, if that was just the one farm site that I was looking at. In any case, thank you so much for stopping by my video. I hope you enjoyed everything you saw and heard here today. If you didn't, feel free to let me know. If you did, feel free to let me know. I hope you come back soon. And as always, have a wonderful day. Make sure to ask for bits and pieces that may not be as popular. When I was a kid, family legend has it that anytime there was a slaughter going on the property, whether it be chickens or beef, I would stand and wait to be handed the hearts, or the heart. And from all calculations, I've been obsessed and in love with eating hearts since I was probably 6 years old. Check out this picture of how much I love hearts. See you later. You are what you eat, and you are what you eat eats. Does that make sense?